Now, friends, I have the wonderful privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, Rick Green. Rick Green is one of the most dynamic and inspirational speakers in America today. Rick is an attorney, an author, and a former elected official. He was elected to the Texas legislature at the age of 27, serving 2 terms, and currently consults and advises state officials and candidates in various capacities. In 2000, Rick founded Patriot Academy, an organization dedicated to educating our nation's future leaders about America's heritage and giving them the skills and tools to make an impact on our public policy processes. Rick joined forces with noted historian and author David Barton, began speaking for Wall Builders in 2001. Wall Builders, an organization dedicated to representing and presenting America's forgotten history and heroes with an emphasis on our moral, religious, and constitutional heritage. Rick and Kara have 3 sons and 1 daughter. He believes no impact is more important than that which we have on our own children and grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in giving a warm South Dakota welcome to Rick Green of Wall Builders.
Thank you. Man, how exciting to see this many people coming out to stand for faith and family and freedom. I kind of feel like Ronald Reagan did that time. He said, people who say there's no more heroes left in America, they just don't know where to look. This room is full of them, and I want to thank all of you for your participation and coming out tonight. Thank you for being willing to come, even though a Texan was going to be your speaker. I know many of you are concerned about this. You think we Texans are just obnoxious. I want to try to explain that. When you're raised in the great state of Texas, you're probably 15 before you find out there are other states out there too. Okay, that's just kind of the way we do it. We come by it honest too. I served with Governor Bush with President Bush when he was governor of Texas, and I was doing a documentary at the time on President Reagan, and I had gone out and went to D.C. and interviewed all these state and national leaders. Got to sit down with Dick Cheney and Trent Lott and all these folks and ask them about the tax cuts of '81. And I'm sitting there across the desk from Dick Cheney. Now, I have no idea at the time, this is back in the mid-'90s, didn't know he was going to become vice president, had no idea he was going to turn into Darth Vader, which I like Darth Vader, I like Dick Cheney. That didn't bother me when they called him that. But anyway, I'm sitting across the desk from him, and he was former Secretary of Defense at the time under Bush 41 and had been a congressman with Reagan in '81 with those tax cuts. So I'm asking him about this stuff. I happen to see on his desk he's got this white phone. It's got a halo on it. Never seen one of those. I don't know if any of you pastors have one of these, but I said, Mr. Secretary, what's with the phone? He said, son, that's a direct line to God. He said, you can use it, but you got to pay me back. That thing's $5 a minute. It's expensive, but I made the call. I paid him. I got back to Texas. I'm sitting across the desk from Governor George Bush interviewing him, and happened to notice he's got the white phone with a halo on it. So I said, Governor, before I leave, could I use your direct line to God? He said, sure, but you got to pay me back. That thing's $500 a minute. I said, Governor, wait. I was just in D.C., man. I was with the Secretary of Defense. I said, man, that's all the states. His is $5 a minute. You're governor of one state telling me it's $500 a minute. He said, boy, you've forgotten where you are. He said, this is Texas. It's God's country. Local call from right here in Austin. So I think I said that backwards. It was 5 and 500. Maybe I had too much coffee at this table. Maybe it's the fact that he was into... Anyway, look, here's the deal, all right? As proud as I am to be a Texan, I'm even more proud to be an American. Can we at least agree on that one tonight? All right, even as bad, look, I know we've got all these challenges. I know we're concerned. I know some of us feel like sometimes we see the stars and stripes maybe fading a little bit. I know there's concerns about where we are as a nation. But without question, we are still the greatest nation in the history of the world. We have still left a track record of impacting the world in a positive way, financially and for freedom and with benevolence more than anyone in the history of the world. And I would say to you, as we've kind of had this, we had a renewed patriotism for a little while in America after 9/11. We just had the 15th anniversary, and it was kind of one of the positives I saw out of that was that people were willing to stand together and say, hey, red, white, yellow, black, or brown, doesn't matter. We're not hyphenated Americans. We're just Americans. We're standing together saying, I love my country. I know we're under attack. And there was just this great renewed patriotism. But as the shock of that day begins to fade a little bit into history, as the winds of catastrophe appear to die down, I would suggest to you tonight we need more than renewed patriotism. It's time for an informed patriotism. See, it's a patriotism that's not born out of fear because we've been attacked on our own homeland, but a patriotism born out of an understanding of who we are and what we have, what it is that we're really standing for. See, when we wave that flag, we need to know why that flag is worthy of being waved. But we need to understand in a time that we're facing right now why this is such an important time to take a stand. This is no time to take a knee. This is the time to say, what is it that American flag is really all about? And I think people are questioning that today. We've got multiple generations now that have been raised in a system where they haven't been taught what was great about America. They've only been taught the flaws of America. So they're wondering why I would say I'm proud to be an American. What do I mean by that? And see, my wake-up call came about 7 years before 9/11. I was in D.C. for Reagan's last public speech. And here we were in this big ballroom, kind of like this, and they had screens like this going all the way around the room, and they were playing some of his greatest speeches. And on that screen, as we're waiting for President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher to come out and give their speeches, they showed that one. I think it's probably the greatest speech President Reagan ever gave. It's on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, and he's actually standing atop the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, France. He's standing in that very spot where our Army Rangers, in taking those cliffs, were beginning that process of taking back an entire continent for freedom. And some of you might remember, he's standing there, the monument's right behind him, and they had seated around him about 15 or 20 of these Army Rangers that were still alive at the time. You got to understand, Rudder's Rangers, 225 of these guys, in taking those cliffs, only 90 survived the mission. And here's about 15 or 20 of them, and Reagan begins to recount the horrific, yet heroic events that took place that day. And he starts talking about how, as one would fall, another would take their place. And the camera started kind of panning across these tough old Army Rangers. Every one of them taken back to those days of sacrifice, tears welling up in their eyes. I'm sitting at that dinner. I'm 22, 23 years old. Never really thought about the price of my freedom. Never thought about the value of what I'd been given. I didn't pay for it. Somebody else paid for my freedom. And I'm sitting there at that dinner. I'm in my tuxedo. My dad's on my right. And there's this guy sitting next to me. His name was George McCormick. He was a bomber pilot in World War II. Great American, great patriot. And we'd brought him with us from a little town called Athens, Texas. And I happened to look over at Mr. McCormick as Reagan is taking us back to those days of sacrifice. And there's Mr. McCormick in his tuxedo at this big fancy dinner, just tears running down his face as he's remembering his fallen comrades. That was the first time in my life, suddenly it hit me, the personal sacrifice that this man was willing to make for me. I wasn't just reading about it in a book anymore. I wasn't just watching on TV. This guy was willing to go around the world and lay down his life for me. So that 2 generations later, a kid he didn't even know at the time could live as I choose, could worship on Sunday morning as I choose, could raise my children as I choose, so that we could all be here tonight speaking freely and living in freedom. He was willing to die so that we could be free. Went home that night, I said, man, I want to be a student of freedom. I want to know how we got it. I want to know how we protect it. How do we preserve it? How do we pass it to the next generation? I started going out and I'd give these speeches and I'd talk about being proud to be an American. And before 9/11, man, if you said, I'm proud to be an American, people didn't cheer like you just did. They'd look at you like you were corny. I mean, they'd look at you like you're old-fashioned. It just wasn't popular anymore. I even had people sometimes come up afterwards and say, this guy comes up to me after one of those speeches and I talk about being proud to be an American. He goes, American? Psh, big deal. I mean, so what? What's special about being an American? Why is our way of life any better than anyone else's? A moral relativism of value systems, as if any system was the same. I remember having to fight textbooks back in Texas that literally said socialism, communism, and capitalism are just 3 equal ways to form a society. A moral relativism of value systems, as if any system of government and economics would produce the same result. And I didn't know what to say to people that would say, American, so what? I wanted to respond the way I used to in my legislative office when I'd get a particular nasty piece of hate mail. And Dale, you know this, when you're a Christian in politics and you stand for truth, you get a lot of hate mail. A lot of you in this room get a lot of nasty emails. You might like this. I had a form letter I would send back when somebody sent me a particularly nasty piece of mail. It just said, Dear sir, ma'am, I thought you should know some fool has stolen your email. and they're writing asinine letters on it. They're even signing your name, and I thought you'd want to know about it. Come to think of it, that might explain why I'm no longer in the legislature. That might have something to do. No, you guys can use that. No, I didn't send them out. I wanted to. My staff would throw them away and write nice letters. But I didn't know what to say to somebody that would come up to me and say, Americans, so what? So I finally started asking questions. I said, wait, let me just ask you a question. Why do you think we call the last century the Great American Century? Why is that? It's because America saved the world. Not once or twice, 3 times from the evils of Nazism and communism and despotism. If you need a tangible fact, friends, think about this. We're the only people on the face of the planet in the history of the entire world to hold a technological advantage in war and not use it for conquest, but instead use it to free and liberate people around the world. 1945, we have the bomb, no one else. We could have controlled the entire planet. We could have made every nation our slaves. That's what every group of people, race of people, every nation had ever done in history. You get an advantage in war, you start attacking your neighbors. What did? We took that weapon, we used it to end a war, saving millions of lives as a result of that. People question the ethics of dropping the bomb these days. Friends, if you go back to that time, and on my radio program with David Barton, I get to interview all these great World War II veterans and these guys in their 90s that talk about what they were doing at 18 and 19 and 20 years old. And just last summer, I had this guy on who was part of the team that was building the hospitals on the Pacific Islands there, preparing for 1 million more casualties if we had to invade Japan, and we expected them to have at least 1 million more as well. You talk to anyone that served on Iwo Jima, Saipan, or any of the Pacific Islands, and they'll tell you we saved millions of lives by dropping the bombs, ending that war. Then what did we do? We took our money, and we went and rebuilt the nations that had attacked us. Nobody's ever done that. Why would we do that? Because there is something different about being an American. There is something unique about our value system. There's something unique about our belief with regard to freedom. See, we believe something very different about these 3 things than most nations that have ever lived on this planet, most people that have ever lived on this planet, most nations that have ever existed. See, we understand that the source of freedom is not our neighbor. The source of freedom is not our government. See, if you believe government gives you your freedom, government can take it away. If you believe your neighbor gives you your freedom, your neighbor can take it away. 56 men gathered in that rented room we now call Independence Hall, and they said, we see how the world is designed right now. Everywhere on the planet, power and freedom comes from God, goes to the king, the government, and then they give it to the people only as they see fit. They said, that's wrong, that's backwards. We believe power and freedom comes from God, but it goes directly to the people. And then we, the people, we create government for the purpose of securing the freedom that God gave us. That's why they said right there in the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their... Notice it doesn't say commissioner. No offense to commissioners out there. No, it doesn't say governor. Doesn't say president. Certainly doesn't say United States Supreme Court Justice. We're not endowed by any of those folks. We're endowed by our Creator. We're certainly able rights that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Just powers, that's the jurisdiction of government. So we, the people, design the jurisdiction, and if government gets outside that jurisdictional boundary that we've drawn for them, they are no longer a just power. They are violating the agreement that they made with the people. And so those 56 guys, they signed that Declaration of Independence, setting up this new government, saying power and freedom comes from God, goes to you, and then you give it to government only as you see fit. You loan it, I should say, to the government. They changed the world with that formula. See, you don't become a powerful or a free or a wealthy nation by accident. There's a cause producing that effect. There's a formula. There's a secret sauce. And if you change the formula or radically transform the formula, as this president has done over the last almost 8 years, you get a very different result. So if you want to have the result of freedom and liberty and prosperity, then you've got to have the formula that produces that. And that's what we've been blessed to have here in America, is that formula that said God to the people and then to government. But about 50 years ago, we sort of made a conscious decision here in America. We said, we like the idea of telling government what it can do, but man, having God in this thing, that's just restricting. I mean, I don't like the idea of God being the source of my freedom. I want to be the end-all, be-all of all things. I want to be the source, and I don't want anybody telling me I can't do something, because that's not true liberty. That's not true freedom if there's any restrictions at all. And so we said, we're just going to change the formula a little bit. We're just going to tweak it just a tiny bit. We're going to make sure the people are still in charge. You still tell government what to do. We're just going to take God out of this thing. So we started pushing God out of the equation, little by little. Began in 62 with Ingle V. Vitale, no more voluntary prayer in school. The next year, Abington v. Champ Murray v. Collette, no more Bible in our schools. Then we said no prayer football games, no 10 Commandments on the wall in a school. Stone v. Graham said if the 10 Commandments was actually on a wall in a school, he said that the kids might see them. If they see them, the Supreme Court said, they might read them. And if they read them, they might study them. And if they study them, they might obey them. Don't kill, don't steal. Kind of sounds like a pretty good thing to be teaching. But we changed two major things in our education system. We said no more right and wrong, no more moral absolutes. We want moral relativism for all. See, it would be offensive if I stood up and said to the classroom that there's actually a right and wrong. If a child, now we train folks, if a child asks you a moral question, you can't even answer it because you're taking a position on right or wrong. So we said, do whatever feels good. You do what's right in your eyes, I'll do what's right in my eyes. And oh, by the way, the second thing we changed, we said, hey, that kid sitting next to you there, why, they're just an accident. They're just a pile of atoms. They're just randomly gathered protoplasm. So if you rape them, they're not a child of God you're raping. You murder them, they're not a child of God. They're just an accident. Then we're shocked that a student can walk into a classroom, take out a gun, murder a classmate. We changed the formula. We got a very different result. Paducah, Pearl, Jonesboro, Littleton, the list goes on and on. We don't even read about it anymore. It happens about every 3 months now in America. We love blaming the guns, right? It's all the guns' fault. Folks, I could put my 1911 6-hour 45 caliber fastback right here on the ground. We could all stand around it and chant the rest of the night. It ain't going to jump up and shoot anybody. Because the gun is not the problem, right? Guns don't kill people. No, it's Chuck Norris kills people is the other half of that. You were close, though. You were close. No, look, you get it. It's not the gun is not the problem. It's the heart of man. Jefferson got this. The founders understood this. When Jefferson said, can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we remove their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they're not to be violated, but with his wrath, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and his justice cannot sleep forever. What's Jefferson saying? He's saying if you ever get God out of the equation, if you ever lose the idea that our freedom comes from God, this system of freedom will not work. We'll lose all that liberty. So by tweaking the formula and pushing God out of the equation, we've lost our freedom. See, we thought we'd still be in charge and tell the government what to do, but what's happened? The whole thing is flipped. And now not only does the government tell the people what to do, we have a federal government so far outside of its jurisdiction that it's telling the states what to do, and actually it's one branch of the federal government. Do you realize, let's just be practical here, that right now, 330 million people are governed by 5 unelected, unaccountable lawyers in Washington, D.C. That's the system we live under right now. The Constitution does not govern America. The Courtstitution governs America. We have a Courtstitution that has replaced the actual language of our Constitution because these folks have gotten together in their black robes and they've stood around their little kettle and they've thrown a phrase in here and a phrase in there, and we don't even know what the law is from week to week. In fact, we have to wait to see what Justice Kennedy had for breakfast before we know how he's going to feel that day to decide what the law is going to be in America. That is not what the Founding Fathers designed. That is not what they gave us. But we tweaked the formula, and now we've got a very different result. I think having God in that equation is not just something that David Barton or Rick Green came up with. George Washington told us, he said, of all the habits and dispositions that lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. So it's just like that analogy of the pillars and the roof. Those indispensable supports are what hold the nation in place. And you know why? Because you can't have liberty if you don't have morality. Think about why government has to grow so much in our lives and in our nation. Because, see, as we lose our morality, as we push religion to the side, which is what teaches us morality, as we lose our morality, government has to step in and keep us from killing each other, raping each other, stealing from each other, taking advantage of each other. So as God and moral values shrink, government has to grow. That's why the socialists are the same ones that have been pushing God out of the equation. Same people that sue and want God out of the equation are the same ones that want to expand government. Rabbi Daniel Lapin puts it this way. He says, you're either going to have an Abraham society or a Nimrod society. You're either going to have God and the church at the epicenter of the community and be strong, or you're going to have government at the epicenter of the community and it'll be the end-all be-all to everyone and lead to absolute tyranny. Well, we've got a choice. See, we can either come back to the founding fathers, back to the founding formula, put God back in the equation of the American formula, and once again have liberty, or we can sit back, take a knee, not stand, and watch our nation go the way of the ash heap of history. And I, for one, am not willing to do that. You see, Washington made that statement for a reason. He was watching the French Revolution take place. And the French wanted what we had. See, so they saw our nation already becoming prosperous and doing well and having liberty. And it was a formula that said liberty from God, under God, respecting the authority of God. And they said, we want liberty, but we're going to tweak the formula. So all we're going to do is take God out of the equation. And what happened? It killed all the priests. It led to the guillotine and absolute chaos. It didn't work. And Washington watching that happen. He said, let us never remove God from the equation of the American formula, because it will not work if we do so. The founders gave us the formula right there in the Declaration of Independence, and those 56 words I shared with you a few minutes ago. The idea that there is truth is something we've got to come back to, folks. I know it's not popular. I know if you stand up in any situation in America today and say there's a right and a wrong, what you're doing is wrong, it's going to harm you, your family, and our country, you got to stop. If you do that, it's very unpopular. You're the bad guy if you do that now. But see, when the Founding Fathers pledged at the end of that document, they believed so much in those truths, they were willing to pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They were willing to give everything to stand by those truths. And so when I think of men like George McCormick, who went around the world and was willing to give his life for my freedom, I have to ask myself, how do I honor that? How do I thank him for that? He's dead and gone. How do I in some way render honor unto whom honor is due? And I was just thinking about it. I was looking it up while we were sitting there, and it's Lincoln's words from the Gettysburg Address. I think it kind of sums it up. He says that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, but that this nation shall under God have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Right before that, he said, think about, here's what we need to do. We need to take an increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. So an increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. See, that's really what we're asking you to do tonight. To take an increased devotion to this cause. To once again recognize why these things are worth fighting for and standing for. And no matter what you've done up to this point, to recognize that you're not done yet. Until you're 6 feet under, you are not done fighting for liberty and standing for liberty. Now, a lot of these people you've seen up on the stage tonight, they're on the front lines. These guys go to the Capitol and day in and day out. These people that are serving in public office day in and day out, fighting these battles to preserve our liberty, but they need us to come alongside them. They need us to hold their arms up. They need us to be praying for them and standing with them. And can I just encourage you that a lot of these folks that are your godly men and women in office, they never hear from us. We love to call when they mess up. Somebody votes the wrong way, we'll get on the phone and call them. Can I encourage you to call these folks when they do the right thing too? And let them know, I got your back. Thank you so much. I'll stand for you in our community. I'll be defending you for taking that stand, because right now it is not popular to stand for truth. So please encourage them as you go along. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Oh boy, I'm almost out of time. Okay, so 2 quick clips I want to play for you real quick. First of all, I want you to think about that increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, and recognize that, like Mr. McCormick, someone paid the price for you to be free. Many of you in this room were willing to lay down your lives for our freedom. It's time for us to again recognize the value of that flag and be willing to stand for it. I want to show you a quick clip. We do a little show called Chasing American Legends, and we go around and investigate history, mysteries, and things like that. But we took our kids out to Arlington Cemetery to try to drive this message home. I just want to give you a quick 60-second clip from that. Hopefully you'll recognize that need to honor sacrifice.
Freedom is not free. It takes a lot of sacrifice by a lot of people.
As we go over to Arlington National Cemetery, we're going to see soldiers that served in every battle of every war throughout American history.
Yeah, it was really powerful. I mean, everything's just dead silent.
I want my kids to come away knowing the amazing courage of these men who made a difference in our country.
I was definitely most excited about seeing the Tomb of the Unknown.
Kara's grandfather actually got a Purple Heart serving at Iwo Jima.
Well, I thought it'd be appropriate to have a Texan come up and talk to you about a Texan. Is that okay?
Heck yeah.
It really is incredible how much Audie Murphy accomplished at such a young age.
He is the most highly decorated soldier from World War II.
Colonel Birdwell has come all this way from Texas to share something with us.
My total medical recovery time was right at about 4 years.
But he had no idea that his greatest sacrifice was yet to come.
There's nothing that will tell you how precious freedom is in paying for it in blood.
That fellow there is now State Senator Colonel Brian Birdwell. He was the closest survivor to the point of impact at the Pentagon, covered in jet fuel, his whole body burned, and just an amazing guy. I mean, he should not have survived, and God preserved him for such a time as this, just as you were talking about earlier, and he's a great hero for us there in Texas. But he helped to drive that home with my kids as we went out to that 9/11 memorial at Arlington Cemetery, and we learned so much about all the different wars and the sacrifices that people have made. And so many generations have been willing to stand on their watch. I love the phraseology that you were using there, Dale. We're on the same page. On our watch, as we've been handed this torch of freedom, we got to think about those generations before us that were willing to think long term, not just one election, not just one candidate, but thinking about how does this affect my children and my grandchildren. I used to ask people, what's your freedom worth to you? What are you willing to do for your freedom? And I finally figured out that's the wrong question. We need to be asking, what's your child's freedom worth to you? What's your grandchild's freedom worth to you? How much are you willing to stand today so that they can live in freedom, so that they can still have religious liberty and all these things that we hold so dear? So recognize that those that came before us have passed that torch generation after generation, and now it's our turn. And now the question is, what do we do at a time where it's so unpopular to stand for truth? What do we do at a time where we feel like we're outnumbered? We feel like we're now the minority. I want to tell you, I know sometimes you feel like you're the only one, but we get the privilege in Wall Builders traveling across the nation and seeing groups like this all over the nation in every state. Believe it or not, I was just in California of all places. And thousands of people coming out for events to talk about what they can do to save the nation and restore these timeless principles. You don't have to guess. You don't have to wonder what you can do. Tonight, you're being handed the tools. You've got an organization that's on the front line saying, hey, come alongside us. We know exactly what the battle plan is. We know what needs to be done to save freedom here in our state and our nation. Come alongside us and be a part of it. What a blessing that is, to not have to start from scratch. So my take-home message for you is two things. Number one, to live the freedom that others were willing to die for. How do you honor those who came before you? You have an increased devotion. And you say their sacrifice is not going to be in vain. It's like that last line in the movie, not last line, but close to the last line in Saving Private Ryan, when that kid gets saved and Captain Miller, Tom Hanks' character, has the whole movie been after this young Private Ryan, trying to get him out and get him home because all his brothers have already been killed and he's the last surviving son. And Captain Miller's whole team has been killed in the process. One by one throughout the movie, they're sacrificing their life for this young 18-year-old Private Ryan. They finally find him. They're about to get him out, and Captain Miller gets killed. And he's sitting there. He's been shot, and he's on the bridge, and he's about to die. And he grabs this 18-year-old kid. He pulls him in close. And with his last breath, he said two words, not just to Private Ryan, but to every one of us tonight. He said, earn this. And that scene morphed from that 18-year-old Private Ryan to 50, 60 years later. He'd gone back. He's standing over the grave of Captain Miller. He said, tell me I'm a good man. Tell me I've lived a good life. Tell me I've lived a life worthy of the sacrifice that you made for me. Earn this. So many ways that we can do that today. Obviously, as Dale was talking about, voting and being involved in the process, not checking out of the process because we don't like the characters on the stage, or we don't like the where the battle is, or what our party is doing, or whatever, all these excuses that we use. Duty is ours, results are God's, folks. I don't care how bleak it looks. I don't care what you see right now in front of you at this moment. Our duty does not change. We've got a responsibility to honor those who died for that flag and died for our ability to be in this freedom. We've got a responsibility and expectation to live it, and not just to live it, but to pass it to the next generation. Invest in these young people. Make sure they get it. Make sure that they understand the value of freedom, because they're being lied to on college campuses all across this country about what our nation is really all about. One more clip and then I'll close. This is a quick sneak peek of the youth program we're doing, because I want to give you some hope. And by the way, if this young man right here didn't give you hope, just hearing a 21-year-old get up here and articulate biblical principles in politics, praise the Lord, man, that's the next generation. Right there. We're raising up an entire generation of them. Watch this clip real quick.
Without question, the busiest part of our year is the week of Patriot Academy.
Welcome, Patriot Academy!
purpose of Patriot Academy is to awaken a generation.
We teach them how to make a difference in the world around them.
The goal is to learn the process that's used to make laws.
This is Cameron's first year.
I feel like I didn't have enough time.
You're gonna be nervous.
And if she doesn't lay out the bill, she'll start beating herself up.
They get to do everything that a real legislator would do.
Hey, are y'all for or against term limits?
He is flipping votes against a bill that I'm fighting for.
I was just counting up votes, and it does not look good.
Ronald Reagan once said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Those veterans literally passing that torch was incredibly powerful.
The banquet is a thing that I look forward to all year.
We want to make it a night that they won't forget.
Generations before us paid the price, whatever price necessary, to defend the fire of liberty. Now it's our turn.
It is our turn. You saw that Marine walking in with that lit torch. We do that every year at the end of Patriot Academy to give that visual of actually passing the torch of freedom to this next generation. If you ever feel like we're outnumbered, I want you to think about what happened on April 19th, 1775. It's the morning after Paul Revere's ride. You talk about outnumbered. We had a small group of about 70 guys lined up there, a pastor and his parishioners. Black and white together, young and old. They stood there in defense of freedom against an overwhelming force of 800 of the king's finest. They're standing there waiting for the British to line up, and as the British are lining up, Captain Pitcairn walks up and he says, or Major Pitcairn walks up and he says, "Disperse ye rebels, disperse ye villains, lay down your arms." Well, our Captain Parker, he walked up and down that little line of 77, he said this. He said, "Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." And then that shot heard around the world was fired. That's where your freedom and my freedom began. Friends, if it's going to survive for our children and our grandchildren, it's got to begin right here, in your hearts, in your homes, on your knees, thanking God for what we've got. But then you've got to get outside the four walls of your church, outside the four walls of your home, and you've got to invest in the next generation. You've got to help come alongside this organization that's on the front lines so that they can be the standard bearer, so that they can keep that torch lit, and we actually have something to pass to the next generation. I believe firmly God is not